started. Hello and welcome everyone to the Deep Dive Workshop. I'm your host, Julie Marty-Pearson, and I am so happy to have you here in our Women's Podcaster Party networking community. And I am also very happy to have our guest host, Alex, here with us. I know you guys are going to get some great tips and info through this conversation. And, you see it's a small group. One of the things I love about that is we get to be interactive. So we're going to let Alex do his thing and talk, and then we're going to have plenty of time for question and answer. And you can drop stuff in the chat. You can raise your virtual hand, whichever you prefer. But I'm going to start with introducing Alex. For those of you that don't know, Alex is a podcaster. His podcast, Podcasting Made Simple, is amazing. I highly recommend it for any podcast host or guest. Lots of super tips there and amazing guests. He also does several times a year a live summit through PodMatch with many of the guests from his podcast. And let me tell you, every time I go, I learn something new. And so sometimes I actually feel like I need two of myself so I can be going to two of the things at one time. But most people know Alex because he is the founder of PodMatch. And I like to say it is the #1 tool for podcast guests. That may not be accurate in some areas, but is the #1 tool I use as a podcast guest to find amazing podcasts to be on. And I really am excited for this conversation because I know I'm going to learn stuff too. So without further ado, Alex, welcome to the community and to the Deep Dive Workshop.
Thank you so much, Julie. And hi, everybody. Glad to be here with all of you. Looking forward to this. Right before y'all got on here, me and Julie were talking, and I like to give credit where it's due. And I know that Julie is a doctor. So I was like, do you prefer Dr. Julie or Julie in this room? And she said, I'm very laid back in this room. These are people that are part of my community that I know, like, and trust, and just call me Julie. And she's like, plus, I'm not like a doctor in podcasting, but I like that. I feel like, Julie, you might be a podcasting doctor, and maybe you should, maybe we should call you Dr. Julie. I don't know.
Maybe I need to start a doctor of podcasting situation for people. It's so funny when you said that to me, Alex. I was thinking when I started podcasting 4 years ago, I didn't really push my doctor because that was from my previous career, but my doctorate is in psychology. And a lot of what I do as a podcast host and guest, I'm leaning on skills I learned through my education and my previous career. I was a teacher, for those of you that don't know. I used to teach psychology and statistics in community colleges and universities. And, as an undergrad, I was actually taught how to interview people, how to run focus groups, how to facilitate. And so that's why when I started podcasting, I'm like, oh, I know how to do these things. I love this stuff. So I appreciate that, Alex, because I still have a mountain of student loans that I have to pay for those those letters after my name.
Well, let's claim it now. But thank you again for having me here. Seriously, an honor. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely. I appreciate you coming. So I think before we get into the nitty gritty super tips, I would love for you to maybe talk about how PodMatch started and why. Like, what was your journey to creating that in terms of seeing maybe a need in the world of podcasting?
Sure. And for anyone who's not familiar with it, I'll explain what it is as well here. And there's some familiar faces here today. So hi, everybody. Good to see y'all. And yeah, I'll keep this pretty brief so we can get into the actual like guesting, the strategy and stuff like that. But if we go back to 2020, I'd been a podcaster for a handful of years at that point. But at the beginning of the year, went to a big podcasting conference in Orlando, Florida. I say big podcasting conference. It was like a week before the world shut down or something like that. And so I go and there's 2,000 people at this conference with no one thinking anything of it. And I was speaking at that conference. So I got off stage. I asked everybody, well, as I was getting off stage, I'm like, hey, I would love to meet anyone here. And I just want to get to know as many podcasters as I could. And so just naturally, people did line up to meet after I was done speaking. And I just had pen and paper in hand. And I wrote down a few things: their name, their email address, and what they were struggling with in podcasting. And interestingly enough, I continuously heard hosts say the same thing that was my struggle point, but I didn't just want to build something for Alex. I wanted to know that I wasn't alone. And it was that they're having trouble finding the right guests without it taking a lot of time. And the key word there, by the way, is the right guest, not just people who will be a guest. The right guest. There's a big difference, right? I can
Yes.
promise that my 18-year-old cousin wants to be on all of your podcasts in this room today, and he would do an awful job on every single one of them because he's just going to talk about basketball. And he, anyway, love the kid. But my point is, like, finding those right people was a problem. And interestingly enough, in that same room, I had people that were there that came up to me that said, "Hey, I don't have a podcast, but I have this new book. How do I get on podcast to talk to hosts about it?" I'm like, "Oh, well, I just met someone 10 minutes ago who would actually be a great fit, but I can't leave this line. Like, come find me later." And so I found myself doing like a little bit of matchmaking while I was actually at that conference over the next few days. And when I came home, I just remembered, okay, 100 people told me that this was their struggle. I heard other things that day, but there's 100 people who said this one. This was by far the one that stood out above everything else. And so I was a corporate guy. Came from the aerospace world, actually, Julie. I know your husband's in that space. I thought you might find that interesting. I was not an engineer, though. I was on the dorkier side. But anyway, my point is, I had a wall of whiteboards, and I whiteboarded the whole thing out. And basically, what I came up with at the end of it was like a dating app, but instead of connecting people for dates, it connects podcast guests and hosts for interviews. And it was trying to put those ideal people together just faster and streamlining all the administration. So that's ultimately where it came from. And so I wrote that idea down on March 10th, 2020, and on June 15th, 2020 is when we launched it in early beta. And that's kind of the rest is history at this point. That's kind of how we got started.
I love that. It's so funny. I had mentioned earlier to you we had Bona and Deidre from Cap Show here at the networking community, and it was interesting to hear there, like they were podcasting, but they hated the show notes part, and so they wanted to create something to create it, so they did it for themselves, and then ultimately it helped other people. And it sounds like PodMatch really came from that too. It wasn't just about what you needed, but it was asking others what they need. And I think those are the successful people in podcasting, that they ask people, what is it you're looking for? What support do you need? And then you meet that need, right?
Yeah.
And I know firsthand because I've used PodMatch both as a host and as a guest, and it does meet that need. I've met people there that I know I probably would not have been connected with other ways because we can't find everyone on social. So PodMatch is a great dating service for us podcasters and guests. So kind of going back to the guesting, I think, you heard a lot of that's what people were trying to figure out. And I'll let you go wherever you want with this. You have, these last 4 years of experience with PodMatch to share with all of us. But for someone who's just starting out as a guest, what are some of the top tips and things you would share with them?
Yeah, the very first thing, and if you're experienced, this will be good for you as well. So, but I do think this is either step one or something to go back and do. And I regularly have to do this again as well. I got props today that I'm going to show. This is called paper. This is called a pen. And a lot of us have lost sight of what these things are. There we go. Stacy's got paper and pen too. I'm sure
Me
others
too.
do as well. I can see some people
Yep.
writing. The reason I say that is because I think that many of us, we need to go back and revisit our why, or we need to come up with one in the first place. And what I mean by that is why be a guest on podcasts? Like, what is the purpose behind it? And I find that nothing beats pen and paper with this, because I think that many of us, myself included, when I'm doing this on a computer, I can be like, well, AI, help me figure out why should I be doing this? And it's like that's not going to really get to the root of it. The idea here is to get to your core, so much so that it's a bit of a conviction, even like it feels like it's tied to your purpose. And that's what I always want to remind everyone. We've got to be willing to do from the start, and we've got to be willing to go back to it regularly, because if we don't course correct, we might start getting off the direction we originally had. So I always tell people, go back to your why. And as soon as you do that, there's another piece that goes right along with this. So figuring out why you're doing it in the first place, right? And then you want to connect to that, a fictitious listener. In the biz, we call it an avatar. Not the blue people from that movie, but the idea is just having some sort of fictitious listener in your mind that is the ideal person that you serve. So your why, that's deeply connected to you, and then you come up with this avatar, which is deeply connected to the host's audience. Those two things go together really, really well. And I get really granular with my avatar. So my avatar's name is Adam, and I can tell you all types of details that are boring to all of you about Adam, but I always remember that. And this is one thing I actually used AI for. I didn't want Adam to be a real person, because there was some very specific things. And so what I did is I just asked AI, I said, here's who Adam is. He's 29 years old, and I describe all these things. He's actually 37. He was 29 when I started. His age mirrors mine. Anyway, but I kind of described like what he's into, where he works, all that stuff. And I had AI actually make me an image of what Adam looks like. And I had it tweak it a little bit. Didn't need to be perfect, but just something so I could see this picture and say, that's Adam. Adam listens to my show or listens to me on podcast because of this. And then I can also say that does reconnect my why. So I encourage you, in my mind, having that why, having that avatar is the best place to start, and also the thing that we should always be going back to make sure that we're not veering off course. I find a lot of people say that podcast guesting didn't have any real results for them. I'm like, well, what are the list of shows you've been on? And as someone who looks at them, I'm like, okay, I can't find any trend here. Why did you go on these 5 shows? Like, what was the reason for these five? Oh, I don't know. They asked me to come on, so I did it. I'm like, okay, well, what were you sharing? Anything they asked about? I'm like, hey, well, again, like you're just, it's kind of not specific. And if there's one thing that we all probably know to be true, is that unspecific goals yield unspecific results. We've got to have something specific in our mind if we want to achieve it. And that's where I would start, Julie. Again, if you're new or experienced, it's always good to go back to this as well.
No, I think so much yes. I was nodding a lot, but you really started where I start with anyone. Like when I'm talking to anybody about guesting, hosting, any of that is why. Why do you want to start a podcast? Why do you want to be a guest? Because if you're just doing it because people told you to, you're not gonna, like you said, there's no results. You have to have a starting point. And the why is so important because guesting, like you said, you could say yes to everybody, but are you actually getting any benefit out of it? And I love this idea of an avatar because I was thinking myself, most of the people I work with are women. Yes, I can help men too, but if I'm looking at a match I've had on PodMatch and it's male hosted, predominantly male guests, they also say mostly male listeners, it could be a fabulous top 1% podcast, but it's not the right match for me and my time. So I think that why is so important for all of us, even if we've been guesting for years, because our businesses change, right? Even the focus of what we do in our business shifts as different things are changing in the world and technology. So it's not going to be the same reason I'm guesting now than it was 4 years ago when I did it the first time. So I think that why is so important.
Yeah, and Julie, that's so well said. Real quick, just a follow up to that, because I think it's a really key point here. Um, the numbers in podcasting can be a bit deceiving. Like, because you mentioned, like, what if it's a top 1% show? Should I do it? If it's not in your niche, it's not what you're showing up, it's not the people that you can serve, then it really is just a vanity metric at that point for you, not for them. Maybe they've done a really good job. So I'm not discrediting someone else's platform. I'm just saying for you, it might not be the right one. And all of us have got to get the right perspective of the value of a podcast. For me, if there's a podcast with even 20 people listening that are the ideal people for me to serve, I just imagine myself sitting on stage with that host or in a room like this with that host. And I always say, yeah, 100% that's worth it. Like, Julie, you said, hey, I think we'll have like a handful of people at this thing. I didn't even second guess that, right? But for some reason, we get preconditioned to think of podcasts like social media. And we're like, well, if there's not tens of thousands of people, it's probably not worth it. I'm not saying anything bad about social media. It has its place, but it is not the same as podcasting. Podcasting is like listeners sitting in seats with hosts and guests sitting on stage. It's that powerful. It has that level of influence on people's lives. Social media, again, has its place, but that's typically where we go when we're exhausted, tired, killing time, right? Something more like that. And again, that has its place. I'm not saying anything negative about it. That's just not the same. When we listen to a podcast, it's a very intentional effort that any of us make. Therefore, it's very powerful. So for me, I never look at the size of the show, and really, I don't care. I just need to know, is it the right people? Like if I show up and I share this message, is anyone going to care? An example is if we were in here talking about, I don't know, like if this was a group specifically about overcoming past family trauma, and you had me in here to talk about podcast guesting, I am in the wrong room. There could be 5,000 people in here, and I am. It makes no sense for me to be here, right? But again, I'm thankful I am in the right room today. But anyway, Julie, I don't mean to preach to the choir here because I think everyone's kind of nodding and gets what I'm saying. It's just we have to remember that, and that should tie back to our why as well. It shouldn't just be big numbers. It should be
Right.
our niche, our focus.
No, I think that's an important reminder because I do think we hear the numbers, downloads, top whatever percent. We hear those things. And yes, I'm very proud to say my pet podcast is a top 5% podcast. Does it have huge downloads? No, it still has like 6,000 total downloads. It's a big percent because I've had it for over 3 years and I'm somewhat consistent with it. There's other reasons. And sometimes as guests, they don't understand the numbers because they're not seeing the backside of podcasting like some of us hosts do. And so you think, well, they have a top percent podcast. I have to go on it. No, no, if it's not the right place for you, you don't. And so maybe you could speak to obviously your why is where you start and is it the right place for you? But what aspects of the right place, maybe can you talk more about that than specifically the listeners or even in terms of strategy, figuring out which ones are the right ones to concentrate your time on getting on versus others?
Yeah, Julie, this is a good follow-up to this. And this all comes down to, I consider this to be the very next step, and it is the initial part of the strategy. It's your research and preparation prior to an interview. That is the next thing. And as a matter of fact, I just recently, I say recently, 5 days ago, finished a like long. I've been working on it for almost 2 years. I talked to 2,260 podcast guests, and some of them were hosts, about what moved the needle most in their podcast guesting. So, like the top contributing factors or success as a podcast guest. The number one thing that people said, it was more than 50% of the total group, that 2,260 people I talked to. Over 50%, the number one thing said that it was their research, their preparation prior to the interview. And for many of them, that started before they even were accepted as a guest. And I think that that's where the strategy begins. And that's where we can find the synergy. That's where it begins. The very first thing that you do here is you listen to the show. I'm not saying go listen to all their episodes. And as a matter of fact, you can probably within 5 minutes tell if it's the wrong show. For most of us, especially my mom always talks about this. She's like, Alex, you'll never understand a woman's intuition. And she's like, but it's hardly ever wrong. And I was like, all right, I respect that, right? So for you all, you might know in like 30 seconds. For me, it's 5 minutes, right? But you might be able to tell immediately if it's something wrong or if it's something worth exploring. And I respect that. That is a superpower. But I think that just taking that moment to listen goes a long way. When I was reviewing some podcast guests that were the ones that quit, so like that group had people like that have been very successful, some that are still on their journey, and some that said that I'm done with this, it's not working. They never researched, and they said they had awful experiences. And I started digging into specifics. Well, like one in particular, actually there was 5 people that were on the same show, which was kind of funny. The show has a host that says he's going to make fun of you and argue with you. Literally, it's in his intro. I'm going to make fun of you and argue. That's why I bring you on the show. My listeners love it. And all 5 of these guests complained. He was rude and he was arguing with me on everything I said. And my response is like, at first I'm like, oh, that's so messed up. Like, why would they do that? And I listen to the podcast. I'm like, oh, wait, you didn't even give this host 5 seconds of your time. He opens up saying, I'm going to make fun of you and argue with you. Like, that's what the show is about, right? And now here's our guest. And it's like, man, just 5 seconds would have helped anybody with that, right? And so for us, the research starts with us just listening. And that's an extreme case. For most of us, as we're listening to see is there any synergy. An example of this, I recently said no to being on a podcast where the host, extremely intelligent, like PhD, and just like got deep into some of the stuff that it's beyond me. He talks very slow. He was using words I actually don't understand. So I was like looking up words. I'm listening like, wait a minute, I can tell this is completely out of alignment. Like it might be the right audience even, but his listeners, if they like him, they are going to hate me. I talk loud, I talk fast, I stumble over my words. I use like, I think my vocabulary is like 600 words and his was like 1,500 or something, right? Like there was a big difference. And so I just knew that wasn't gonna be a good fit. That's what you're looking for. You're looking to see if it's going to be a good or bad fit. And at the same time, this goes straight into prep. If you're like, this is good, then take the time to reach out at that point. And we can get into that in a little bit, I'm sure, Julie. But real quick, the point is just you're looking for those connection points now. How do they address themselves? Like, example, does Julie refer to herself as Julie or Dr. Julie? You should know that when you step into the room. You should know that, like, okay, do they have like a pet name for their listeners? They always call them the same thing. Example, I went on a show and they called their listeners Fire Nation, is what the host always called his listeners. So I referred to them as Fire Nation on the show as well, just to kind of build that synergy. You're looking for those little things. And if someone does talk slower than you, like it's okay to slow down a little bit, knowing that the listeners listen to the show because they like the host. And so you don't necessarily need to not be yourself, but you try to mirror that as much as you can. And it builds that connection, that synergy. So to me, that is the first part of the strategy. And again, seeing that successful podcast guests say this is the number one contributing factor to their success, it's something we got to take seriously. And I think it's the main thing that gets skipped by a lot of people, though. We think that I need to get on 100 shows. I don't have time for this. But I'm telling you, if you can get on 10 instead and do a really, really good job, I think that's a better use of your time.
Thank you for that. As someone who preaches research and also as a host, I always share with people I get reached out cold DMs, emails every single day for both of my podcasts. I can tell within the first sentence if one, they've listened or even read the title of my podcast. I have people pitching this guy's book and this person's that. And I'm like, well, did you read that it says the story of my pet? Pet is the key word here, people. But it's like that's also very frustrating as a host because you're literally wasting my time with emails and messages that I can tell you're just cold reaching out to 100 people today. You're not even listening or reading, you're just sending it. And so it isn't so much that we're saying you have to spend a lot of time, but you don't want to look like you're not even paying attention to the details, right? It's like at least know what podcast you just sent an email to. So I think that, and for me as a researcher, that's something I used to do. I love the research part. And please just don't reach out to someone if you haven't listened, because listening to a podcast isn't going to just tell you what it's about and how they host. But if you want to know, is it audio? Is it video? Is it live stream? Is it edited? Is it, what kind of questions do they ask? Like you can get all of that from simply listening to the podcast. So I think that was such an important point. Let's see. We have a question. Leslie asked, do you look to see how many podcasts people have guested on when you choose them? So as a host, is that something you look at, Alex?
That's a smart question, Leslie. I think there's some value in that. I used to not look at this at all, but more recently, I want to see that my show isn't going to be there first. And that is not the standard. Like sometimes that you shouldn't even look at that for me now, because my podcast is about, it's about podcast, being a podcast host and being a podcast guest. So I'm actually looking for people that are actually experienced in that. It's hard for somebody that's his first time to be on a podcast to talk about being on podcasts, right? Like that doesn't really work in my case. So it's different for everybody. But when I used to have an entrepreneurship podcast going back years before I was doing PodMatch, I had a number of people that was their first time on a show. One of the persons was his first time ever on behind a microphone or anything like that. And it was one of my most popular episodes of all time. He just showed up. He was extremely successful. He'd done very well. This was just a new thing for him. My show happening to be the first of now hundreds, if not thousands, that he's done over the years. But I was the person who took a chance on him. So it does require doing a little bit of research. And so I did a pre-call with him because I wanted to I couldn't find anything about him. He had like a LinkedIn profile with 10 people following him, right? And so I was like, is this a real person, right? So we did a pre-call. I think if you are gonna have someone new on, they're brand new, it's good to kind of be able to walk through the ropes a little bit. But I don't think it's a problem unless your show is, again, something that's for experienced interviewees, interviewers type of thing. In my case, it doesn't make as much sense. That is a good question.
That's a good question.
Yeah.
Because I can also say from my perspective, I've had some people who I thought were going to be big guests, quote. On my pet one, I had a international pet rescue organization. So I thought, oh, this is a big name. It's not, it wasn't one of my biggest downloads. I have a lot of people reach out who are authors or publishing companies and they have new books coming out. Well, some of those can be great, and I've had some good ones. I've also had some authors who were horrible guests. Like I was pulling the words out of them. So just because someone can write well doesn't mean they can interview or speak well. That's another thing I've learned. So yeah, I think it really is about doing your research as a host, especially. But as a guest, you want to make sure it makes sense before you even ask to be on the podcast. Because if they've just had 5 guests say talking about the same content you want to talk about, they probably don't need another one right now. So that's another benefit of listening ahead of time, because if you have a very specific thing you want to promote or talk about, if they've already done it, they're probably not looking for guests in that area again, unless that's their main focus for the podcast. So I think there's so many aspects to that. Yeah. Valeska asked about the pre-call. Do you want to talk a little bit about how you do that?
Sure. Yeah. I'm just going to read through this real quick here. Yeah. You know what? This is a smart group. Thank you. This is another, this is like a gift to get asked a question like this. People like, hey, pre-interview, check, good, right? But there's a right and wrong way to do a pre-interview for sure. I go on a lot of pre-interviews that just feel like a miniature version of the actual interview we're going to have. And that is not the goal of it. The goal is to explore, is there real synergy between us? And for a long time, I did my pre-interview calls, not even over Zoom or anything like that. I did it over an actual phone call. And it was maybe 5 minutes. Like, hey, Julie, glad to be here with you today. Hey, I was thinking about this as a direction for our podcast interview. What do you think of that? And then just very briefly let them talk and be like, is there anything else that you're really excited about right now? Is there anything going on in your life or in your work that maybe we should just bring up that you think would be helpful? And that's it. And then I kind of explain, okay, well, now this is my listener, and I'll kind of throw that in there as well. Like, do you have any questions about that or anything? And no, usually it's no, that sounds really great. Yeah, I think this would really resonate with them. It's cool, great. I really look forward to our time. I try to keep it really short, but it's more so I'm listening to what they're saying, not just what their portfolio says. Because I've
Right.
had some people on that. Here's an example. I had this guy named Jay Bear on one time, and I was having him on. It was when I first started the software company. It was perfect for me. A little bit of a selfish interview, but he had this book come out called "Hug Your Haters," and basically anyone who's like talking trash about you, about your company, like why you need to hug them and how to do that. And so I asked him like, hey, like, is there anything else that you're really excited about? And he said like, actually, yeah, like I am excited about this, but like I just did like a lot of data on how much this works and what it actually does for a business. And I was like,
Mhm.
okay. I didn't ask him any follow-ups to it. I'm like, I'm gonna ask him about the data side of it now. And like I knew that. So I'm like, okay, we're gonna talk about this because that's what I think is good for my listeners. But I'm also gonna say, is there data to back this up? Because I now know he has that. So for me, I try to keep it really relaxed. I want to see if there's synergy between us. And there was one time I took a pre-interview call and there was no synergy. The guy, it just fell flat. It felt like I was just pulling teeth, even just trying to be like, hey, so how are you today? Like it was a lot. And I ended up saying, hey, like I don't think this will be the best type of interview. And I did that through a follow-up email because I wanted to think about it a little bit. I'm a little slow sometimes like that. But if I knew on the phone, I probably would have said it, but I needed a little bit more time. So for me, they're not formal. It's just we can handle all the admin stuff in the green room. This is just to see, is this going to be good for people?
Yeah, and I think that's important because it is hard to say no, right? I think we all know that both as a host and as a guest. But like I also like to remind people, especially when it's you say no to a potential guest, it's your podcast. It's your platform. It's your blood, sweat, and tears and time and money, right? And it's hard for us to say no, but we also have to really be thoughtful about who we're saying yes to and who's the right match. And even if it's not the right time, and say, you know what, in 6 months I'll check back in. It might be the right time for you to talk about that, but that's not the focus right now. There's ways you can play with it, but what I will say about that as a host is you'd rather say no after a pre-call than say no after you've recorded it and then are never going to use it, because that's a harder no, I found.
Yeah, real quick on saying no, I think this is an important. Is it all right if I talk about that for just a moment here?
Yeah, go
I feel
ahead.
like saying no, at least for me personally, this is the hardest thing for me to do as a human. I'm naturally a people pleaser. I love people, and sometimes to a fault when it's taking advantage of me, and I put myself in that situation. And that's just me being fully transparent here today. It's really hard for me to say no, and it was part of my upbringing. My mom was the same way. She's a saint, and but there's been a handful of things that have really helped me. One of them is this quote that really just resonated with me. And it's that every yes has to be protected by 1,000 no's. Every
Mhm.
yes has to be protected by 1,000 no's. If I'm saying yes to this thing because I know that this serves the people that God put me on earth to serve, right? That I'm supposed to be serving right now. That means there's 1,000 other things that are going to come up that I probably am going to have to confidently say no to. And it's not me saying no to be mean, but it's to say, you know what? I already have a focus. I already have something that I'm doing that I know that if I deviate from this plan, I won't be serving people the way that I want to anymore. And a lot of times that happens with my podcast. I mean, that's what's made me more comfortable with saying no is how many people reach out to be a guest on the podcast. They're just not a right fit at all. And
Right.
learning to do that in a kind way, but also standing my ground, knowing that, like, hey, I said yes to this guest, which means there's a bunch of them now that I have to say no to. And
Mhm.
getting comfortable with that has been really tough. The other thing I'll mention here is just it requires that you really know your direction yourself. I know we already talked about why, but really getting clear with that. I find that with clarity comes victory. And part of victory is being willing to have hard conversations and being willing to say no. And the reality is, most people don't even think about it twice. I'm over here sweating to tell somebody no, and they're like, cool, no worries. I'm like, man, that took me 20 minutes to send that, like to get the courage to say, and they didn't even mind. Like,
Right.
and it's us that we put that on ourselves. And so saying no to podcast hosts as well, you will have people reach out and it's not going to be the right fit. And it makes me at least feel bad because I'm like, man, they really went out of their way to bring me on. I know I can't really serve the way I want to there. And so I always position, you all have heard me say serve a few times now. I always position that way. So when I'm actually saying no to an opportunity to be a guest, I say, hey, listen, I listened to your podcast, which is true. I don't just say that. So I listened to your podcast for a few minutes. I realize I'm really not the best guest. And I really respect what you're doing and your listeners. I know that I won't be able to add the most value. And so I just need to say no to this opportunity right now. But I really, really appreciate it. It's letting them down very easy and telling them, like, hey, I listened. I know it's not right. And
Right.
no one has ever gotten mad at that. Not once.
Yeah,
Anyway, I know I'm rambling here about this thing. I just know
no, I
for me,
think
it's
it's
a
an
big one.
important conversation. I am too. I'm a people pleaser. I'm a good student. I'm do what I'm supposed to. It's very hard to say no, and I always finding myself like I have to explain it. It's like we don't have to explain it, but you can give them context. You can say, it's just not the right fit, whatever way it is you're saying no to. But it is hard to do. I do, when I first started, I did pre-calls. And then I got to the point where I was just finding so many great guests, I didn't feel like I needed it. But then I've gone back to it because
Hmm.
sometimes I can tell by the email and looking at their stuff, like, I don't have to worry about this. They're a great guest. That's one of the reasons I love PodMatch, because when you're looking at guests or hosts, you can go right to the where else have they guested? What other podcasts are they on? Things like that. So you get to get a sense of who they are. But sometimes a pre-call is needed, and it's a hard thing to do because it takes more time. But if people really want to be the right fit for you, they're willing to give you that extra time.
Yeah.
And then we had another question, which I think is going to kind of move us to the next step. We've talked about the why, we've talked about the listeners, we've talked about research. So Danya asked, can you share tips for how to pitch? Would a speaker sheet or reel be useful tone part for some part of the pitch, or does it need to be different for guesting?
Yeah. So the first thing I want to share here is this goes back to research, but while you're researching, you probably would have ended up on the host's social media or website, wherever it might be. I always say the best pitch is the one that meets them where they're at, how they like to be reached. So meets them where they're at and how they like to be reached. The best example I can give of this, I have a friend who has a podcast and he loves talking like all kinds of topics. He was a professional soccer player or footballer because he's from Europe, and he just loves talking with anyone that has like an interesting story about travel and stuff like that. And in his description of his podcast, he says, "Do not email me. I have not checked my email in like 18 years, and I will not respond." And I have people regularly still this day reach out like, Alex, I don't get it. Like, I really want to get on his podcast, but he won't respond to any of my emails. And they're really good emails. Like, there's no sense on ignoring them. And I'm like, you didn't do any research. You are not meeting where he's at. It's not that you didn't have a good pitch. He just didn't see it. He never will. And he's very proud of the fact that he has nearly 1 million emails that are unread in his inbox, which would drive me mad, by the way. I see
Yeah.
someone else in here who feels the same way. But my point is, you want to look at where the host is spending their time. If they're always doing like selfie video reels on TikTok or on Instagram or something like that, if you reach out to them in the DMs there doing the same format that they're doing, they're probably going to reciprocate really well to that because that's clearly the type of content that they enjoy consuming themselves. And so meeting them where they're at is a really big deal. Many of them do like DMs, many of them do like emails. A lot of them use PodMatch, or there's other services which I encourage you if you're not on PodMatch, type in PodMatch alternatives, look at all of them. Don't just go with the one because I'm here. There are good options and they're different for everybody. But my point is, there are like directories like that as well. So what I'll share is kind of the framework, if you will, for how I reach out once I've found that location. I try to keep this the same pretty much everywhere. Now, granted, if I do a video of some sort, I have to do some written stuff with it. But the very first thing I'll share here, and I'll have a few steps for y'all, so I encourage you to write these down. So this is when I'm reaching out to pitch, which is such a salesy thing to say. It's just the initial outreach to a host, right? Number one is to keep it short. I find that most podcasters, they got into podcasting because they didn't want to read long emails. That wasn't like the deciding factor of it, right? And I've gotten so many pitches every day. I get them, and now even with AI, they're getting longer and longer and longer. And there's the old saying that I didn't have time to write you a short email, so I wrote you a long one. I feel like it's becoming that more and more. So keep it short is really important. If it's a video, keep it short. You don't need to be super long-winded. Now, as you open it up, you want to lead with value. And I find a lot of people, we get this part wrong. We need to say, hey, like, saw your podcast. Hey, I want to let you know I'm a doctor and I've achieved this, this, and this, and I'd love to be on your podcast because I have this new book. Like, that's not leading with value. That's saying all the things that are in it for you, the guest. The host is thinking about themselves, but more so, they're thinking about their listeners. And so when they can only see you, me, right? The guest, it's all about me. That doesn't say anything for their listeners. So leading with value simply means, first and foremost, addressing, acknowledging the fact the host has done something incredible. And I do find that a lot of, again, the AIs have kind of infiltrated this a little bit in a non-integrity driven way where it will say, I really liked your latest episode. Here's 3 things I liked about it, because people just type in, tell me something good about their latest episode. So you got to be really careful with this. This is all I say right here. I say, hey, Julie, really enjoyed your podcast. I left it a 5-star rating and review on Apple Podcasts and I attached it here. To my knowledge, AI still can't do that. And that immediately, always, every single time, I like very rarely don't get a response. A host at the very least says, wow, thank you so much for actually listening and taking the time to leave it a rating review. That means a lot. That makes you stand out. Now, at the very least, you have their attention. That's what you want. So lead with value is number one while you're keeping it short. Next thing is to make a meaningful request. What I mean by a meaningful request is, well, first off, I get a lot of pitches which have no ask in it. I don't know if I'm reading a documentary or if I'm reading some sort of like press release. I don't know what it is because there's no ask in it. And at the end of it, I'm like, I think they want to be on my podcast, but they never even said that. But maybe that's what they want, right? Like, it's hard to tell. That would be a request, but a meaningful request means you going a step further. And again, because we've already done our research, what that means is actually looking at their recent backlog of episodes to see if your topic has been covered. And so an easy way to do this that I regularly do is I'll just go on Apple Podcast, I'll hit Command F, and I type in all of my keywords and see if it comes up on the recent backlog. Because you can load up hundreds of episodes by just pressing more and more and more, and it'll show all of them. So I just want to see, has podcast guesting come up in the last year? And if the answer is no, there hasn't been a single episode about it, but it's a podcast about innovative marketing ideas, I can now make a meaningful request saying, hey, again, left you 5-star rating review. I attach it here. I don't know if you're looking for guests right now, but I would love to come on to talk about being a guest on podcasts because I think it flows really well with your topic of innovative marketing ideas. And I realize you haven't covered it, or at least in the last year. Done. Like that's, I'll just leave it at that. That's my meaningful request. Now, most hosts are going to say, are you serious? We haven't covered that? Like, is he right? They're going to go do the same thing. They'll be like, have we not covered this? Like, this is an important topic. So now, again, they're kind of saying, okay, go on. What else do you have here? The very next thing you need to do after this is to offer credibility. Offer credibility. And I find that this is another thing that many of us, we get long-winded on and maybe don't do exactly right. In my mind, the highest form of credibility is who I know that you know. If I'm the host, who do I know that you also know? So example, if any of you in here are in this room today, reach out to me later to be a guest on my podcast and say, hey, I was in that mastermind group with you and Julie, the women's podcasting party. Like we did that deep dive on podcast guesting. We already have a mutual connection now. And so now I'm like, oh, well, you hang out with Julie. I really respect Julie. Therefore, I respect you now as well. Right? Like that's what happens. So you're looking for that synergy. And you can do this through social media by seeing friends in common. But here's the thing, you might not have anybody in common, but look through some recent pictures. Listen, this is some like low-key stalking a little bit. You're looking for any connection point that you have. My favorite fun example to give this is, has anyone here ever been cut off in traffic before? Like someone just like totally cut you off? Makes you really angry, right? It's like, it's infuriating because you feel like they almost killed me. Like this is ridiculous. Occasionally though, maybe this hasn't happened to anyone other than me. Someone cuts you off. You immediately go to like rage anger mode, but then you see a bumper sticker that you really resonate with. And you're like, you know what? They're probably not so bad. I bet they didn't notice I was there. Right? Like anyone else ever been there? Because I have done that a lot. My wife is like, wow, that person almost ran you over. And you're like, oh, but we like the same movie. We're good. Right? They have a Star Wars bumper sticker. Of course, they're great people. That's basically what you're looking to create. That is what we're looking for. Do you have the same movie in common that you love, the same music, where you at the same concert at one point? Do you follow the same authors? Like, what is that connection point? And then from there to the original question here, like, should you have some sort of speaker sheet? I always tell people to link to it. Again, you want to keep this short so you can say, hey, I noticed we both know Julie. She's an incredible person. Isn't she? Like really cool that we both know her. You can ask her about me if you need to. And also, here's more about me. And then link out to where they can go find more about you themselves. So you're kind of giving them some direction if they're interested, but you're not pasting it all here. And the last thing my sign off is really short. My sign off is just like, hey, if I do end up being a guest, no pressure, by the way, but I would love to be able to share the episode with my audience as well, because I think it'd be really valuable for them to hear. And I'll also create a blog post for it on my website, because I always do every time I'm a guest on a podcast. Love to hear back from you either way. I just kind of leave it simple at that. And I don't lie. I will share the episode. So make sure you have some integrity in it. But podcast hosts love it when guests say, I'm going to share the episode, because Julie knows for sure. And some of the others here do. Both Julies know. I just saw both your faces. That's really rare for a guest to share it. And it's almost like, wow, really? You shared the episode. That's amazing. So if you can up front say that and mean it, it can go a really long way. And so again, to kind of recap, keep it short, lead with value, make a meaningful request, offer credibility, and mention sharing the episode. And keep all that, again, as short as you possibly can. And it goes a really long way.
Yeah, those are amazing tips. I wrote them all down myself to remind me what to do the next time. And I think the value part on both sides, both as what value you can provide as a guest, but also by sharing it, because that is one thing I always say. not everybody, some people will share like a reel on social or repost it on social, but that's not really going to help the host. Like saying, I'll send an email to my list, I'll do a blog post, I'll do a newsletter. Those are big things that are going to reach more people than just a reshare on social media. So having those things, whatever it is, if it's a newsletter for you or a blog post, whatever you do regularly, you can say that. And that definitely, for me, if I read that, I'm like, oh, great, that would be amazing. We could, and another thing to do if you're a host as well as a guest is offer to do a podcast episode swap. I actually just had two in my inbox the last couple days, and they talked about their podcast, what they talk about, why they think I'd be a good fit for their podcast, and then why they'd be a good fit for me and how we could do a swap. So that's another way to really show you've done your research and you've listened, but you're also giving value to both of us by saying maybe we could swap, and that's a better way for us to share our value with each other's communities. So I really love that. And I know, Danya, you mentioned the speaker sheet and all of that, and Alex said, provide a link. One of the things I do on my website, I have a page for speaking and I have a page for podcast guesting. And the podcast guesting page not only talks about how I support people as guests, but it also lists all of my guest episodes at the bottom. So that is a great way to show, see, I have 10 episodes I've been a guest on. I know how to be a guest, but they can also see the type of podcasts I've been on too. So that is a great way to do it without having, like a PDF you have to send to people because you're always having to update it. So those are great options also.
I put and listen, this is my PodMatch link, but this is the public facing side of it, just to see like what is on. This is my Media One sheet. I use this for everything. So that has like all the details that you would need of me, I think, at least. So just to get an idea of like what's on, if you're like, oh, I think I need to make one of these, you can do your own web page. Like Julie said, I don't necessarily suggest PDF because you are going to want to change it. And at least for me, PDF is extremely difficult to change. Maybe if you're good at it and there's a way to do it easily, fine. But like Canva could even be something that could work really
Yeah.
well. I like having
I
something
I
digital because
use
this ranks
Canva for
on
mine.
search engines. So
Yeah, I use Canva for mine. It makes it really easy
cool.
to update.
Yeah, it
But
does.
yeah, still, it's another thing you have to worry about updating, right?
Right.
And one thing I will mention since he shared his PodMatch link is the one thing I love about PodMatch is the way the profiles are set up. So each guest has to fill out all these parts before they're added to the PodMatch system. And what's great about it is you get a lot of great info. You get a lot of data, you see the tags, you see the topics, you learn about when you're looking at a podcast, who listens, what do they like to talk about, how do they talk about it, plus the links to listen and all of those things. And that's another reason I like PodMatch both as a guest and a host, because you get a lot of data within one place without having to go outside to do as much of the research. So we've talked about pitching. What haven't we covered in terms of podcast guesting that you want to mention?
I see something here about the follow up.
Oh, yeah.
Should you follow up? Yeah, if you don't hear back, definitely follow up. I always add people to a CRM. I use Notion right now. I haven't found anything else I like, so any CRM will work. But basically, something that reminds you. We don't want to leave that up to our memory, right? That reminds you after a certain time to follow up. I always try to follow up in a different way first. So if I reach out via email, but they're also active on LinkedIn, I'll be engaging a little bit on their LinkedIn, and eventually I might even send them a message basically saying, hey, I sent you an email last week. Just wondering if you got it. And I'm sure you get so many emails. Like, would it be better if I sent it to you here or something else? And so I just start trying to find other ways to kind of get in with them. And so typically you can hear back, but for me, sometimes it's 2 or 3 follow-ups. And I try to never do them within less than a week. So the way I like to do it is like a week later, and then 2 weeks after that, and then a month after that, and then I just leave it alone. So like that's kind of, I don't know if that's good. It just feels like I'm not being too like stalkerish. So like, or like, hey, did you get my email? Right. Like 10 minutes later.
Right.
That I feel comfortable doing that, but to each their own on that.
Yeah, and I can say I appreciate follow-up because there's so many emails that like
Right.
somebody just sent me a follow-up on something. I'm like, thank you. I saw that 2 days ago. I forgot. I started but didn't go back yet. So I just did it for them now and then it's done, right? So follow-up is a good thing, but don't follow up too much because then it can get annoying and they may just not respond to you because they're annoyed.
Right.
I'm sure it's a hard balance for all of us because we get so many messages in so many places. But I would say, as both a guest and a host, make sure you're checking your messages in every place you are, because sometimes they're hidden because you're not friends with them on Facebook or whatever it may be. I try to once a week go into all of my accounts and check hidden messages, check ones that are attempting to message me, because a lot of it is spam, but you never know, you could be missing a connection that is really important. Well, we have about 10 minutes left, but before we fully open up Q&A, Alex, is there anything you haven't mentioned, points you want to make that maybe we didn't cover?
I think to kind of land it here, maybe talk about call to actions for a moment would be good.
Mm.
If everyone's okay with that, real quick. So let's imagine you land the podcast spot, you're on it, you already did all your pre-work, like you're fully prepped, you do a great job. What does matter is the call to action that you'll provide. And most hosts are going to say, "Hey, where can listeners find out more about you?" And getting this right is very important. And we all mean well, so we like to give people options, but the reality is most people are cooking, cleaning, walking, driving, working out while they're listening to a podcast. And so for them, information needs to be very limited for them to remember it and to take action. So you want it to be something that's singular, first off. So if your call to action should be something that's singular. So it's like, where can they find out more about you? It's not email me, message me, go to my website, call me, right? Like you don't want to give all these options. You need to figure out which one is the best, singular. Where do you want them to go? And again, you already know who the listeners are because you've done the time. So it might not be the same for everybody. And so figuring out what that is really important. But right after singular, you want to make sure that it's also simple. It needs to be really simple. And simple means a few different things. Number one, the words that you use to describe it matter. Some podcasts, this could be okay. If it's like a long form podcast, you could do a 5-minute explanation as what your call to action is, if that makes sense. But for me, I'm in podcasting. It's really simple. And so it needs to be under 30 seconds because I want people to remember it. So keeping it simple means keeping it short as well. But it also means giving it a simple way to be followed. Now, what do I mean by that is I do own the domain alexsanfilippo.com. That is not a good call to action, though, because most people can't say it and no one can spell it. And so I typo it all the time. I'm like, is that an L or an I put in there? What is that, right? So I don't want to send people to alexsanfilippo.com because that's complex and it's hard for someone to remember. Later on, they'll be like, what was that guy's name? I can't remember how to spell his name. I can't remember what it was, how to pronounce it. So you want to make sure that whatever URL or domain or wherever you decide to send people, it's very simple. Again, from an understanding standpoint, saying, yeah, I will remember what that was. And domains are not expensive these days. You can get a really affordable domain that is memorable for a lot of people. And so those are kind of my main thoughts around the idea of having a call to action. So again, it's got to be one thing. We got to make sure that it's really simple from the words we're using to describe it to where we want people to actually go.
And I think what you said is important for us as hosts and guests, because
yes, it is.
I even need to remind myself sometimes when I'm doing a solo episode, like, it's not 10 things, it's one thing.
Right.
What am I talking about? What's the one thing? Is it a workshop I'm offering? Is it my membership? Is it networking? Because if I say all three, they're not going to do any of it. There's actually research that shows the more options you give people, the less likely they are to do any of them. So one thing. And with guesting, what you said is so important. Make sure it's some place that's going to exist in 6 months or a year.
Yes.
Because one, you don't know when the episode's coming out. Even if they tell you, it can change. And you don't know in a year from now if your membership site's still the same or whatever it is. So I'm going to say, go to juliemartypearson.com because I know I update that and everything's there. Or if I'm doing one, I'm talking about pets, I'm going to say, go to the storymypetpodcast.com because that's always going to be there, even if the content is changing. So that is
That's
what
good.
I would call a
Evergreen.
super tip.
Yeah, evergreen.
Yes.
That's good. That's a good bonus tip. Thank you, Julie. I need to make sure I mention that in the future as well. That's important because podcasts have a long tail. I mean, there's some podcasts I was on years ago that are just now starting to get traction.
Yep.
My website has changed since then, unfortunately. And I had somebody recently message me and say, hey, like, you talked a lot about this really cool thing you were doing. Where is it? I'm like, oh, that's gone. Right? Like, I'm so sorry. Like, that's not there anymore.
Well, someone who's in our community, Susie Rosenstein, she has a podcast. She just hit 8 years. She has over 400 episodes. So if you were on year one, I'm sure your websites have changed a lot since then. So
right.
We can't always catch everyone, but we can do our best to make it easy. Okay, I am going to remove our spotlight so we can come back to everybody and just open it up. We have, a little less than 10 minutes left. I know some of you put your questions and stuff in the chat, but if you have more questions, feel free to unmute and ask, or anything else in the chat that you would like to talk about. Okay, have everyone a minute to think about it.
I can go quick first, I guess.
All right, Stacey, come on.
Well, it's because of the fact that normally I'm the chatterbox that will talk to everybody about anything. So people have asked me to guest, but sometimes I wonder if they really want me to. You don't have to pull things out of me. I am not a regular guest on podcasts. I've only had a couple of people just ask me to do something that they were doing. And I don't have a podcast. So I don't know what I don't know. And this has been super informative. I have taken 1,000 notes and it's been very good. And I think to myself, maybe I should kind of go on PodMatch and see what's out there because I love what I do. And it's a case of I would love to have more people understand what I do, and that might be a good format to do it on. So I guess I just want to say thank you because I sat here quietly and listening and writing, and it was really informative for someone who's a total rookie and has
Hmm.
no idea what I'm doing.
Wow. Well, thank you for sharing that. By the way, you're extremely well spoken, have a great voice. I think you would do really good in this
Oh,
space.
thanks.
Yeah, I think you
And
got that for you going for you for sure.
That's okay, because I was writing down all the things that you were saying, and I'm thinking to myself, you'd be good if I ever put you in front of the people that I know,
Oh, cool. Look at
because you
that.
talk about connections, you talk about to slow down when you're working with people who just because you want to connect with those people. And it's like, that's what I teach. You already know that. So,
You bring up a
well,
good point though, Stacey. Is like,
right.
listen, for everyone here who might be newer, or if you bring on someone new, like it's okay to try it. Like, I'll be real. If this isn't fun, don't do it. Like, I'm not saying that everything in business has to be fun, but like, we should have a good time with this sort of thing. And if we don't, if it's dreadful for us to be part of podcasting on either side of the microphone, it's better not to do it. Find something that actually brings you joy and kind of fuels what you love. And because I met somebody recently who was a guest on a podcast, and he said he's just like so nervous every time, he hates it every second of it. He's like, but I got to do it. Apparently, his publicist said you had to. I'm like, maybe you don't need to. Like, it's probably, I think people can feel that energy, and maybe you shouldn't, right?
right. No, I think
Agreed.
that's first of all, I agree. Stacey would be a great guest. I know that myself from speaking with her.
Thank
You
you.
know, I think there's something scary about new and different if we've never done it. And I always share that when I started my first podcast, I thought I need to see if I even like doing it. Right? Like I've never sat in front of a mic on Zoom and recorded myself or talked to people this way. And what I found was I love doing it. I actually love the interview part. The solo episodes are harder for me because I like having someone to
Same.
engage with,
Same.
right? And so, yes, both of my podcasts are interview heavy, but I force myself to do a solo every so often because I know that I need to for content and my business and all of that. But you have to enjoy it because if you hate it and you're building it into your structure of your business or what you do, you're always going to dread it. And I push myself because some days I don't feel like getting on here and talking and showing up and doing the thing. But once I'm on here, I get the energy from being in the Zoom room with one person or with a group of you. And so I totally agree with what Alex said. You have to try it to know if you even like it. Because why put your whole business in one direction if you don't even enjoy doing that part of it? And that's why we love handing things off like social media and editing. Like you guys do that for us. We want to do the stuff we love doing, right? That's what we love doing. Well, thank you, Stacey, for sharing. Yeah, go ahead, Danya.
Hi, so I have a kind of a two questions.
Mhm.
So, Julie, you were talking about how you have a speaker page and a podcast page. I have a speaker page and then I have a press page because I've done, I've done a few podcasts in the past. I haven't done anything recently, but I've done, summit interviews. So there's video on there, there's audio, there's links to things, but it's a little bit, I guess, out of date. And so I'm wondering if that would be, not a great idea to share that. That's one. And then, Alex, I have a question for you, which is I joined Matchmaker FM a couple years ago, but haven't actually used it. But I
Well,
gleaned through the emails recently. I've been doing that and I go look at the podcasts I think might be a good match. I'm in natural health and wellness is kind of my area. And I have a hard time deciphering whether I want to if it's someone who's kind of new, it looks like they haven't done a ton of episodes. There's only like a handful. I'm wondering whether that's really a good use of my time to apply for that. So I wonder
sure.
if you have any
Julie,
perspective on that.
sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. Sorry about that.
No, no worries.
You want to start off, Julie, with the first part of that? I know we don't have a lot of time, so I'll keep it
Yeah.
brief when it comes to me. It's
I think that, it really depends. on what it is you want to do with the guesting. I think it goes back to your why of what link you want to share. I mean, obviously for me, because guesting is a part of my business, it makes sense for me to have a separate podcast guest page versus a speaker
Right.
page. But I don't think there's anything wrong with having a media page where
Yeah.
it's everything. Because
Yeah.
even as a guest, if they see you're a speaker, then that means you're probably going to be a good guest. Speaking and guesting is much more, around the same length. So if
Yeah.
you have a media page, I would share that, but I would also say if you know you're going to be doing this more and setting it more, then maybe you need to go update it, or at
Yeah, I can
least,
add.
update what your bio says or your photos, things like that, because those kind of updates are easier to fix and then it looks a little fresher than, if you
That's-
haven't done that.
Yeah, I could put more things that are a little more recent, but I think the most recent was like maybe a year ago or a year and a half ago, something
And
like
that's okay. That's not too long off. And one
Yeah.
thing I will share, and then I'll hand it back to Alex, is if you're not sure if it's been a while since you've guested, go to listennotes.com, put your name in, and it's going to pull up any episodes you've been in.
that. Oh, really?
And
Okay.
so that's a great way to search. Like, it's something I did when I started purposely putting my guesting. I had some from several years ago I hadn't added to my website, so I just put my name in it and it shows me everything.
Got it. Okay, good to know. Thank
So
you.
on the latter half, by the way, Matchmaker is a good company. They have good reviews. I would continue, make sure that, use it. I mean, you do have to use it,
Yeah.
but give it a shot and see how it goes. I'm okay with going on newer podcasts if there's a consistent release cadence. So I can see where they have, let's say 10 episodes, 12 episodes, but they've been releasing one every single week. I will typically in the conversation as we kind of get moving forward, I'm like, hey, do you have like a queue of episodes or anything like that? Like just to get an idea to figure that out, because there's some people that they only have a few episodes, but like the other day they have 5 episodes, they have 29 finished, and because before they launched they did like 30 some odd episodes because they're like, I don't want to mess this thing up, like I want to have like a good
Uh,
system in place. And I was like, that's brilliant. Like I'm maybe that's too many. I had 13 when I launched in the queue. But yeah, talk to them a little bit and figure out where they're at. But I always look for a release cadence. At the same time, there was a show that invited me on the other day. They've had the show going for 3 years, but they had like 11 or 12, I can't remember what it was, but just over 10 episodes. And I was like, so you're letting one out like every 4, like whenever you feel like it type of thing. Like,
sporadic. That's
yeah, I
all.
think it's gonna be too hard to really grow an audience because you're not, it kind of show, and I'm not trying to be rude, it kind of shows that maybe they're not too serious about what they're doing. So that would be my advice there.
Great.
And
Thank
I think that's a really good thing because I can use both of my podcast examples in this. My pet podcast I've had for 3.5 years, but I only have 53 episodes. So that shows you I'm not putting them out every week. I'm doing it. It's more, it evens out to about once a month. Well, that's kind of my side passion project. It is evidence I know how to podcast, so it does help my business. But that content is not directly leading to my business. So I put it out less often because it's different. And then my Podcast Your Story, which is directly tied to my business, I actually started it a year and a half ago. I put 5 episodes out and I paused it because I realized my why wasn't clear enough. And I didn't want to keep putting episodes out that didn't make sense to my business. So the last year and a half, I've been asking, I've been talking, I've been getting a sense of what people need. And then I relaunched it with that wider perspective. So it makes more sense now. But I'm also sitting on a dozen episodes I never used because I paused it. So when people reach out to me, I say, hey, you might be a great guest, but I'm sitting on a bunch of episodes that I'm putting out now. When I'm ready to record again, I will reach out to you.
Oh, okay.
Because that makes more sense for me right now. And so I always promote Listen Notes again because Listen Notes is basically a directory. You can search it by keyword, by people's names, by topic. But in there, you're going to get data you don't see in the podcast players. You're going to see how it'll say, like, I think on one of mine, it says about every 28 days a new episode comes out. So it will actually tell you episode length, how often, when it started, how long they've been doing it. And those are important pieces of data. Like Alex said, research, know those things because you're going to learn a lot by looking that up first, then looking at it after and realizing, oh man, they're not going to put this out for 8 months. Why did I do that? Right? Maybe it'll still help you in 8 months, but if you have a particular focus now, you really want to look at that data to make sure it's the right fit.
All right. Yep.
Shows like Business Wars, which is one that I love, shows like Conan O'Brien, like these different shows, they all had one episode at one point, but you knew they were going to stick with it from day one. You could tell that they were serious, right? So, and those are like some big extreme examples, but there's a lot of smaller shows you can look at and be like, this one, they're going to do something. So anyway, always be looking at that.
Well, I know we're over time, and I know everybody's packed full. So if you have
Did
to
anyone have
go,
another question real quick though? Like I want to make sure, do we get to all of them? Like I have another minute if anyone else had
Yeah.
anything. If not, we're good.
I'm good to hang out. I just want to say I appreciate you all being here. If you have to
Okay.
head out, you will also get the recording to this, so you can go back to it if you like to. And I do want to thank you, Alex, for coming and sharing your experience and expertise. I know I learned stuff and was reminded of things I needed to be reminded of, so I appreciate that. And in the little time we have, if anybody else has any more questions, feel free to put it in the chat or unmute and ask.
I've got to run, but thank you. This was
Appreciate
really
it.
helpful.
Cool.
Thank you,
If
Danya, for coming.
no one's
Thank
had a
you,
question, I'm good. I just want
Stacy.
to make sure we got to them all. I want to make sure we gave everyone the space there. So
Yeah, Julie,
well, Julie, thank you
Valeska,
again for having me.
anything?
This was great. I really appreciate you having me here, and thank you everyone for being here and hanging out. This was fun.
Yeah, I appreciate you coming. This was great. I get, what I realized in taking that space in my podcast was more people were asking me about guesting than they were about launching. And so that's why I knew you would be a great fit to come, because we all have these questions. And I also think it's important to note that podcasting is changing all the time. So these answers shift as podcasting evolves and changes. And I also say widens, because what a podcast is so much more broad now than what it used to be, even when I started 5 years ago. So it's important to hear what other people are doing, because I learned by podcast guesting myself. So thank you, Alex, so much for being here. Thank all of you for coming. If you have any more questions, let us know, and we'll head out soon.
You guys were
See y'all.
awesome.
Bye,
Thank you for the
everybody.
help
Thank
today.
you. Appreciate y'all.
Thanks, Alex.
Thank you, Julie.
Bye, Julie.
Bye.